Hello, and welcome to Insight Incorporated. This is a podcast where we question and investigate and explore life's deepest questions. I'm Ian, and this is my buddy James.
How's it
Hi,
going?
James.
Happy to be a
It's
part
going
of
pretty
it,
good.
man. I like the explore.
Yeah. That's a good addition. That was James's suggestion.
Yeah.
Tonight we're going to talk about an article that I came across through an email in my inbox from Tim Ferriss. Not directly. It probably went to millions of other people, but it was a collection of articles that he sort of recommended at the year's end. And I thought it had a lot of interesting things to say. I'm going to read a summary here from Grok because I did not have the time to write my own. It is by Nabeel Quereshi, and Grok says that his essay, How to Understand Things, advocates for deep comprehension over superficial learning. He describes intelligence as involving virtues like honesty and bravery, not just cognitive speed. Quereshi highlights the importance of not settling for easy answers, promoting the will to think through personal motivation and effort. He uses examples like Michael Faraday's experimental approach and the necessity of asking basic questions to illustrate that understanding requires direct engagement with subjects. Understanding requires direct engagement with subjects. The essay critiques educational systems for valuing speed over depth, urging for slow, thoughtful learning and the use of personal experience to truly grasp concepts. So tonight, James and I will interact with the article and sort of elaborate our thoughts as they arose and arise in conversation. Anything that you wanted to add to that, James?
Just a clarification, it's not the same Nabeel Quereshi as the guy who wrote that book, Seeking Allah, Finding Jesus. Different
That is a famous
Nabeel
one.
Quereshi.
What are the odds?
I was bamboozled when I first read it.
Like, wow, this guy's writing pretty good for having passed away in 2017.
Yeah.
The article was released in July of 2020.
Yeah. Should
yeah.
be a good indicator right there.
Yes. I didn't know the dates either. And I definitely had some cognitive dissonance there. I was like, I think this guy is not the same guy, but maybe. I came to the faith after Nabeel Quereshi died, so I was not on the train, the bandwagon.
Bandwagon.
Yeah. Fanwagon.
The fanwagon. Yeah, I liked what he said about the Grok summary. Mentioned that the key takeaway was how education encourages speed over depth. I thought that was a very crucial thought.
Yeah, I think we're just going to work our way through the article. So when we come across his thoughts on that, I wanted to kind of zoom in on that too, because I definitely think that that is something that I long for people to implement in their life. But let's just start in the beginning and work our way towards it. I think this will be a good way to navigate his thoughts. So he starts off by noting that the smartest person that he ever knew had a habit that he found striking. After he would prove a theorem or solve a problem, he'd go back and continue thinking about the problem and try to figure out different proofs of the same thing. Sometimes he spent hours on a problem he'd already solved. I had the opposite tendency, Quereshi writes. As soon as I'd reached the end of the proof, I'd stop since I'd gotten the answer. Afterwards, he'd come out with 3 or 4 proofs of the same thing, plus some explanation of why each proof is connected somehow. In this way, he got a much deeper understanding of things than I did. I think that this is completely neglected, and it relates to the educational point. In our world, if you can do something at a passing grade, then that's good enough. And to me, I think that, I don't know, you and I spend time in Christian spaces and think about our faith. And so a lot of these things relate to the ways that we understand God and interact with Him theologically, like meaning what Quereshi writes about understanding something, I think deeply connects with our desire to understand God in a relational way. Like you can never fully understand God, but you can know Him. You can know aspects of Him. And the same goes for any other subject matter or person or idea. And so the idea of pursuing something past the passing grade is revolutionary. Like we are taught to think that there is nothing more important than a sufficient answer, and once you've achieved that, you can move on. And I don't know. I think that this is, it's the opening lines of the interesting article, but I believe that there's a lot of meat there, just conceptually.
Yeah, I've been toying with this thought a lot. That a lot of the times when we bring up the whole searching for the sake of coming up with a sufficient answer, really you're treating the process of growing understanding as a means to an end. And the thought that I've been toying with is that treating any type of pursuit as a means to an end, there's always an element of disingenuine motives. Like, for example, like if even when we have a conversation, the whole point of having a conversation is so that my issue is resolved, and treating this as a means to an end, it's very selfish. It's very like, I'm here because I want you to serve me and my ends. And so I think I like this thought a lot because it evokes a deeper passion when seeking out understanding. There's actually room for your passions to grow in the process, and you're able to linger in the process because you're not just enduring the process because you have a deadline to meet, and you have, which sometimes, I mean, it is a necessary evil, I think. It's unrealistic and very idealistic to try to think that like I can treat everything as an ends in and of itself. That's just not how the world works. But if we have the opportunity to, and we're able to be intentionally try to actually enjoy the process rather than, treating the process as a chore so that you can get to the destination quicker, you're able to actually experience much more depth in many different ways, in all areas and all pursuits. You're able to linger there longer because you're not just trying to get a sufficient answer. You're actually enjoying the process and investing in the process all the more.
Yeah, I forget who he quoted later in the article, but he talked about the will to know, I think, and how the will to know is sort of an indicator to a philosopher or a great mind that the problem or the topic that they're investigating is worth the heavy-duty investment of their mental energy and physical energy and time. And so what you're saying is true and right, and it is certainly an approach that I think is worth looking into for people who want to know more deeply what it is they're talking about. It is more about encountering the things on your own, with your own self, rather than taking someone's word for it, which I don't see any problems with that personally. I think that that's an incredibly noble pursuit, and you can only multiply the value that a given idea or doctrine or thought brings to the table by examining it yourself and coming away with significant growth in your understanding of the issue. Another key point is that intelligent people simply aren't willing to accept that they don't understand. Sorry, let me start over. Intelligent people simply aren't willing to accept answers that they don't understand, no matter how many other people try to convince them of it or how many other people believe it. If they aren't able to convince themselves of it, they won't accept it. I mentioned to you before we started that this is something I found personally relevant. I just have always had problems accepting things that I didn't understand. I have used the example of trying to learn algebra from my mom. I was homeschooled and it did not make sense to me at the time. I think I have a better grasp now, although I don't choose to really pursue algebra very much these days. But I didn't know enough to know what was going on, and there was a lot of things that she was trying to get me to do so that I would be able to sort of do the thing. You know, you want to be able to do algebra, but the why of it, even just like motivationally, I didn't have a lot of motivation to accomplish that, which then, of course, you know, being homeschooled, I was sort of like parentally encouraged to do it, you know, punished or whatever, but like rightfully so. I was a little bit belligerent in my disdain for the whole thing. But my point here is just that I you know, I'm not claiming intelligent people. I think that this sort of connects some dots for me. Like, I am not wrong for being unwilling to accept an answer that I don't understand. It is actually, you know, a sign of wisdom or something, or a desire for wisdom. I want to know more deeply what is going on. Why is this the answer? So that I can utilize the information that I have for my own benefit, rather than sort of to play a game that I don't necessarily know if I want to be playing. And so taking it out of the educational, I think that this moves with me through my life in my employment. At most jobs I've ever had, I am often unwilling to accept just, you know, answers from people that I don't necessarily see the why in it all. And it can be painful at times and difficult to, I don't know what to say, because it definitely, I can be prideful in this area, but I just am, I really connected with this part because I am often unable to convince myself of things that other people seem totally convinced of. This also manifests theologically and can be a little bit, what's the word? Contentious. It just is it could be a touchy subject when it comes to the things of God. But in all those areas of my life, I've always wanted to know more. And as I grow older, so that I can accomplish something with whatever it is I'm putting my energy into. I don't want to waste my time, which is kind of an arrogant phrase, but that just seems to be the issue. And so it was encouraging to read that line because, you know, he attributes it to intelligence, which is not a bad thing, you know?
I think at face value, it can. I'm thinking it's not simply just saying, like, when I hear aren't willing to accept answers that they don't understand, I'm trying to think of what do we mean by not accept? Like, what's the motivation behind not accepting the answer? I think,
Yeah. Is it getting out of homework like me when I was 13?
Yeah.
That might be a bad example. Yeah.
Well, no, I just mean, even like when it comes to the theological things, you know, like, it's not simply like I don't fully get it, so now I'm going to be contentious about it. It's like I don't fully get it. I'm gonna push back, but I'm not motivated by trying to tear down. My motivation is to try to understand better, and maybe sometimes that's not conveyed, or maybe better yet, it would be better to convey that up front because people don't really know what's going on in your heart. And I think these type of um, foundational, or to move away from the theological, if they're like a core belief or core value of a certain systematic way of thinking or process, like at a job or something, like this is just the way that we do things. This is how the established order. When you're questioning and having a hard time accepting the assertions, um, I think a lot of times that could be misunderstood for like just being pugnacious or being contentious. But if it's for the sake of I actually want to get it, I'm wondering if there's a better way than saying like I don't accept it. It's just like
Yeah, I agree. I think that maybe the language is precise here to describe what is going on, but you wouldn't necessarily want to approach a conversation that way, right? You would want to rephrase it in some way that's a little bit more constructive. Later on, he talks about asking dumb questions. When you don't understand something, just saying, I don't understand that, it slows everyone down, but at the same time, it offers an opportunity for everyone who also doesn't understand it, but is unwilling to risk the social embarrassment of admitting that they don't understand it. It offers those people and yourself the opportunity to understand something and therefore wield the power of whatever it is that you are attempting to understand. So I think that the shared benefit is immense. This is an idea that Jordan Peterson talks about somewhat extensively. I've heard him say it many times, probably 10 or more across a lot of different things. And it's fascinating because it requires a certain intellectual humility to admit that you don't know what's going on. And yet that's what leads to this increase in capacity for understanding. So what are your goals? I think a pugnacious individual, to use that word, they're I don't know. I get accused of being condescending sometimes, even when I ask a question. And I don't know what that is precisely, but I have an intuition here that it's tied together, that my questions aren't taken as authentic or something. And so I hope to be authentic in those questions. And I actually think that I need to improve in the area of asking, quote, stupid questions, because very often I like to pretend like I assume I know what's going on because it feels better and people are impressed by my, quick ability to understand something, when in reality I don't fully understand what's going on, and therefore I'm kind of behind the curve.
yeah.
So
Yeah, I think well, I was trying to say it in terms of the better yet, actually be able to vocalize what your motives are. It's like to truly leave no room for ambiguity of why you're asking the question. Because I think sometimes when there's like a established order and you question it, like it's you can easily assume the motivation is contradiction, rather than just as you could assume the motivation is they genuinely want to understand why that is the established um, assertion. And so I think in terms of growing in communication, be able to, like, you ask the question, but then like I'm only asking that because, and then you just like leave no room for ambiguity. Like they know that like the motivation of my heart isn't to try to undermine your whatever your assertion. It's really just to understand it better.
yeah, I agree.
I think the only reason why I say that is because, as we talk about, intelligent people simply aren't willing. Like even these bring connotations of like hubris and arrogance, and calls to mind. It's like got kind of like a a bad picture in the mind. It's like, oh, this know-it-all is now trying to undermine my authority or something. But trying to redeem that, like intelligence isn't. It's easily associated with arrogance because it can easily turn into that. But to be truly intelligent, you also have to be emotionally intelligent while you're striving for this, this understanding. You have to also be understood, and that takes, I think, emotional intelligence.
Yeah, vulnerability, a willingness to sort of present stupid questions, a lack of understanding.
Yeah.
Earlier we brought up a verse. Do you have it at hand? Could you read that?
The Corinthians one?
about knowledge and arrogance.
Oh boy, can I.
Let's go.
I have to turn to it though. The Bible's really long.
It is. Lots of words.
I left a penny on the page. I forgot that I bookmarked the page. It's in 1 Corinthians chapter 8. It says, I'll just read it out of context. If anyone supposes that he knows, I'm sorry. I'm not going to read it out of context. Now, concerning things sacrificed to idols, we know that we all have knowledge. Knowledge makes arrogant, but love edifies. If anyone supposes that he knows anything, he has not yet known as he ought to know. But if anyone loves God, he is known by him.
I think that's extremely relevant. I also feel like that's the last time I get to say relevant in this podcast.
Cut yourself off.
Obviously, it's relevant. We're talking about it. But just as far as it connects with this article and the premise that it is the habit of intelligent people to double check that they understand something, and not just double check, but to find other ways to grasp what it is that they're attempting to understand. And the idea that knowledge and intelligence correlate would lead some to conclude that knowledge leads to arrogance, and so intelligence leads to arrogance. But I think that a better word, or maybe a more spiritual word or something like that, would be wisdom. And wisdom is sort of like the proper application of knowledge. And so when Paul in 1 Corinthians talks about the following sentences, he says, but love edifies or builds up. And so that is what we're just talking about with the idea of offering contradiction, not for contradiction's sake, not to just dissent but because you want to know more deeply what it is someone's talking about, or because you want to know more deeply why it is that you do something as a spiritual community or a business or anything. If you are loving, and that's a difficult word, it takes the whole Bible to sort of illuminate the meaning of that. But I think Paul follows it with the sentence he does, because the important thing is that you're in pursuit of God in your contradiction. And so not settling for an easy answer is a form of love that builds something up, rather than just sweeping the misunderstanding under the rug or the lack of understanding that you have. Keeping that hidden leads to sort of a false sense of knowledge, right? And it's sort of the reverse is true. So I don't know if that makes sense, but I think it's important to sort of throw the wisdom term in there, because that might help receive a little bit more of what Quereshi is trying to get at with his use of intelligence.
Yeah. And I think oftentimes it's not even just like the misunderstanding can be swept under the rug. I think a lot of the times the misunderstanding is like attacked. It's like, I don't get it. And you can easily alienate and then villainize, which gets you to then attack the assertion or something. And also, you mean
from the point of the person contradicting, or the point of the person
contradicting, or even point of the person. Either parties can fall under this misunderstanding as well. It's like a deeper understanding enables you to actually love deeper. It's like you can't really love what you don't know. Um, but when you recognize you don't know and you seek deeper understanding, that's the loving thing to do as well. Um, and so I just bring that up because that's another aspect of it too. It's like if I'm just asking this question for knowledge's sake, um, and maybe even what you have in mind, you may have something better in mind, and so like you have a greater knowledge on this thing, so you can even attack the assertion when you know better, and then it can easily lead to rather than being gentle and trying to bring about edification. Um, some motivation could even be I'm questioning this because I think I have something better in mind. I find out I actually do, and therefore I just bulldoze you. Um, so I don't think really any of it is like for knowledge's sake. It's truly for an edifying sake, and that is
Yeah. I was just going to say that maybe understanding is something more akin to the ability to grasp and wield whatever it is that you're trying to understand rather than just a form of propositional knowledge. Like, so, I know this fact is different than I can use this bit of information to hone my ability to pursue this goal or to, interact with a person in a healthy and positive, generative way. I just think that understanding is probably more akin to the ability to use something than it is to just sort of a cold retention of fact.
Yeah.
Following the course of the article, he moves into sort of some of the ways that this can be difficult and maybe the reasons that not everybody does this. So one component of that is the use of energy. Thinking hard takes effort, and it's much easier to just stop at an answer that seems to make sense than to pursue everything that you don't quite get down an endless and rapidly proliferating series of rabbit holes. It's also easy to think that you understand something when you actually don't. I thought that those were profound words, especially as it relates to people that are willing to just settle for the first thing that makes sense. I don't know. I don't think that the entirety of this podcast will just be applying sort of secular ideas to Christian habits or practices, but this one in particular sticks out to me as something that maybe it's just any group of people that are sort of bound together by a deeply held set of beliefs. Obviously, I would hold that Christians are bound together by relationship with a person, and that person being Jesus Christ. However, I think a lot of people are bound together by a set of beliefs. As you can see with denominational splits, we hold this to be, we understand it to say this, and so we're going to go over here and think that all together. And a lot of people get kind of swept up in the, I don't know what to call it. The easiest is maybe too generic, but an easy answer that is repeatable, that's condensed into a cute phrase and is sufficient for most circumstances. But yeah, do you have any thoughts on why people might not pursue understanding and Nabeel's conclusion that it at least has something to do with the amount of energy to invest in it?
I think it probably leads to that same thing I was getting earlier with pragmatism or utilitarian. 'Cause a lot of times these type of, I mean, we even call the whole entire root of an inquiry a problem. And so if I can find something that satisfies the problem, uh, why would I waste any more effort or energy or time on the matter? So I think that's probably what it is. As soon as you find something that satisfies the problem, then move on to the next.
Yeah. There's a probably too big of a topic to get into, but I really do, and probably in the future we'll talk about it, but I really do think that education is designed, like really designed to produce people that are willing to settle for the answer that's provided to them, right? And even if you just think about it for 2 seconds, our culture is sort of predicated on the easiest possible solution to any problem. Amazon, fast food, all these things are designed to solve your problem in the shortest amount of time possible with the least amount of effort possible. And so I think that's a product of the type of people that make up the society that we live in today, rather than the other way around. I don't think the society, I mean, that's what a society is the people that make it up. But I don't think that as a culture, it's influencing the way that we go about our daily lives and look to solve our problems. We are human beings, and so we naturally are looking for the simplest solution to our problem. It's fascinating. I think a lot of what modern life is, or maybe modern philosophy, that's the wrong word, but what people are thinking about is sort of how to reincorporate things that would have naturally been a part of your life in the past. So working out is sort of a form of replacing the necessary physical effort that would have been included in your job, or the natural process of trying to secure your food for the day. And since we don't do that anymore, we have to sort of cut time out of our day to go pretend like that's what we're doing so that our bodies stay healthy, because that's a normal part of living life. And so I think that it holds true across many different domains in our lives.
Yeah, it sounds like it's really a product of like a scarcity mentality, and recognizing that the resources it takes to wrestle with these things are finite, the time and the energy. And if you can tackle, normally when you tackle one problem, it leads to a bigger problem to tackle. And so it's like, if we could just speed up this process, we can get to the heavier, weightier things at a faster rate, which is way more efficient. We utilize less finite resources and then progress at a faster rate. It's like that whole Ford industrialization concept applied to all areas of life, trying to get as efficient, have the most product as quick as possible with the less amount of resources used. And so even what you're talking about with the replacing the hunter and gathering thing, it's like, well, I'm being less efficient because this problem has been solved, and so therefore I can now tackle bigger problems, and we start to think that the next problem that we're tackling is more important, when really we didn't even have a deep understanding of the first problem we tackled that could have otherwise led to more advancements. And so it's just like, yeah, like a settling for, oh, this is the problem I ought to devote my time to because it's the weightiest one that I know of. When and the other problems that were smaller have already been solved, quote solved. Um, when the alternative would be maybe to reconsider and not just go with the status quo and like, okay, has it actually been solved? Like, do I understand the solution? Do I even understand the problem? And I think that's kind of what this is touching on as well. Being able to recognize like that maybe I ought to question if I actually understand the thing. Um, because I think that's what he talks about with the thinking hard takes effort. It's much easier to just stop at an answer that seems to make sense than to pursue everything that you don't quite get down an endless and rapidly proliferating series of rabbit holes. Maybe these other issues are actually a product of different rabbit holes that came from that lack of understanding that we settled for.
Yeah, no, that's a good point, that as you do pursue a deeper understanding, you're able to trace the breadcrumbs that you've left yourself back to the root of the problem, or let's say the entry point to the problem, and then from that point the rabbit holes sort of lead you to the root. But if you don't understand how the root and the entry point, connect, then you're at a disadvantage for, well, like this is talking about, your ability to understand the various ways that a problem could be solved. I think they're called vectors, the different vectors towards the problem, angles on the problem.
Yeah, and maybe you find out because not even breadcrumbs for yourself. It could even be breadcrumbs of previous generations. Especially when we come to existential crises and problems. So maybe you get to the root and you're like, why did they go that way when this way could have been a better way? And it's
Yeah,
like,
I really love. I didn't know that I loved history. I guess maybe I could have intuited it, but anyway, I didn't know it until recently. I started listening to Dan Carlin's podcast. He did a 2-part series. It was like 9 hours on Vikings, and I don't know why, but I just was like, "This is amazing." And I like to listen to a lot of podcasts, so I haven't gotten back to any of the other ones, but I imagine I would enjoy most of what he has to say. But it's so interesting to see the various geopolitical influences on an entire group of people, in the case of the Vikings, that allowed them to flourish, and then the different ways that different societies tried to incorporate the Vikings. They try to solve the problem of the Vikings because they're essentially pirates. And so without a strong and widely influential power base or government structure, they had to get creative and sort of buddy up with some of the more powerful Vikings or figure out different times of the year that they were more vulnerable. It's just it's super fascinating to look at the different factors that play into some of the decision making of people that were dealing with the Vikings. I think that relates to what you just said about tracking down previous generations' existential solutions and being able to, the more information you have, the more you can maybe parse through to grab little bits of, oh yeah, I don't think that's very relevant to what we're going through today, but I could totally see why at the time this was the direction that guy took. Any thoughts on the, I don't know if you see this to be true or not, but just the idea that, I don't know, to me, I can definitely see that I'm much more willing to venture into the rabbit hole territory of something because I do not like existing only on the surface at that entry point or the easy answer point. And so do you have any thoughts on maybe sort of understanding why it is that there are a lot of people that are sort of willing to stay there? Because I think for me, I just want to say, I get it. Not everybody is like me. It's not great to be like me. There's a good quote by Elon Musk that I recently heard. I don't know if it was in his book or whatever, but he, a lot of people want to be Elon Musk because he has all of the money in the world and makes amazing technology and sends people to space and catches rockets and all of this really ridiculous technological achievement. But he said, I don't think many people would want to be me if they knew what it was like to be me. It's a storm in my mind or something like that. And I think that, I'm nothing like Elon Musk. I just think that there's a lot of uncertainty that arises with the pursuit of those rabbit trails. And I can definitely identify that is a tendency of mine, a desire of mine, and it leads to sort of uncomfortable positions from which to wrestle with understanding and answers.
yeah, I think it ties to that scarcity mentality. Because it's almost like the initiating any enterprise or endeavor, it takes a leap of faith. And when you have in mind, like, I'm a limited human being with limited time and energy, I think the cynicism of our culture, maybe it's not even just our culture. I don't even want to boil it down to like this is a now problem. I think this is just a human problem of like with this leap of faith. I've been thinking a lot about the parallels between despair and hope. Now they're very similar because they're both like a expected event that is to come. And so both of them have an element of like, I don't see it right now, but I expect it to happen. But despair has the pretty much like, I'm going to be harmed. It's going to be detrimental to my well-being. And hope is like, well, from a biblical hope, it's probably like, I'm still going to, it's still going to cost something of me, but it'll be worth it. But the despair is like, it wasn't worth it. I found out in the end. I'm going to find out after all this, after, plummeting down the rabbit hole, that all of it was in vain. I wasted it all. Now I'm lost. I think that's a common thing, especially with people who are young and like us, and kind of like, well, if I make this choice, that means I can't do all the other things. So I that's a sacrifice. But also choosing not to do anything is also a choice that is costly as well. So no matter what, it costs something of you to do this. And the cynicism, that's why I brought up cynicism, because I think that's the common root of despair. And that's normally the motivator for people not to strive to develop in that way, is because of the despair that comes from cynicism. Like, it's not going to be worth it. It's just gonna blow up in my face or something, and it very well could. That's why, like, that's a realistic despair to have. But is it the right one? It's a valid. I should say it's a valid. The despair is valid, in that logically that conclusion can be supported. I think that even ties into how intelligence and all that. Like, intelligence can't solve that for you, really. Experience can, in a way. So maybe if we're gonna lump that, I would lump that into intelligence. But you lack the intelligence that you would gain after you take the dive. So it's really just a matter of faith, and people lack faith. I think, if I were to sum it up in that.
Yeah. No, I love that. And I think that experience is going to come back around if we get to it in a pretty powerful way. I think that experiencing things yourself is sort of one of the biggest takeaways I had from this article. But we'll get to it then. I was struck by parts of what you were saying, and in my mind, I went to the picture or the story of the prodigal son, and the way that the younger son is dissatisfied with what the father is providing him, because his inheritance is going to come presumably at the end of the father's life. And so he asks for it in the beginning, and then he goes out and he sort of experiences all of this world that is not his own because of living in his father's house, a well-ordered place, you might imagine. And so the younger son goes away, wastes all of his money, and goes through a lot of experiences. And then he comes back and is able to see what he has in his relationship with his father in a way that the elder son thinks he understands, but it is only when the experiences of the younger son are sort of brought into contrast with his actual, what his actual inheritance was, the relationship that he had with his father, that the older son starts to question what's going on, because the son was bad. He did all the wrong things, but this older son was like, I've been here doing the right thing the whole time. And so his experience was lacking as well, because he thought that the relationship was based on a sort of, I don't know, what is that, a quid pro quo? Like, I scratch your back, you scratch mine.
Means to an end.
Yeah, exactly. Which actually, the means to the end thing was really interesting earlier to me. And then we can move on. But
I also have a thought too.
Oh, okay. I thought that what you were saying reminded me of it's a Jordan Peterson concept, but he quotes Tolkien as talking about this when he describes Aragorn and the hobbits, and they're crossing that river of the dead people, and they can't see the rocks in front of them. That's how he always equates how he searches to know what word to use in a sentence, and you'll hear him just very slowly feeling around for what it is exactly that he's trying to say. And he attributes that to his desire to say what is true and what unifies himself. So what gives him a better understanding of what he thinks and what he's trying to say, so that he's able to pursue the adventure of his life. That's how he describes it. And so, and obviously that's a whole Petersonian thought, that he really thinks that honesty leads to the pursuit of adventure. And that means to an end thing is almost always something that he brings up in contrast to saying what you actually think and living that adventure out. Using people as a means to an end is attempting to construct a world in which your understanding is sufficient. However, I think that puts up guardrails on what is possible in your life. And so there's a lot of people that live that way in a simple means to an end mindset that prohibits them from pursuing the rabbit trails to sort of come to an actual place of understanding where they know this is where I stand on this issue, and therefore I'm able to recognize with humility and an accurate view of things that this is where I stand. I don't fully understand this, but I think I have this bit of experienced knowledge that I can sort of push off from, This is a standpoint that I have, and that allows you to be much more authentically yourself, which is scary because it is much more adventurous. You have no idea what that is going to lead to in relationship with other people who may or may not want you to believe what they believe so that they don't have to go down any rabbit trails themselves.
Yeah. Like the guardrails aren't up, so it could go anywhere.
Yeah. And that's terrifying.
Yeah. I was going to bring up earlier. It seems like maybe. No, I'm going to say it. Isn't she brought up the prodigal son? I'm reading a book called He Loves Me by Wayne Jacobson. I'm tying it in because it's a phenomenal book that I think everyone should read at least once in their life, maybe 3 times. But it's not often that
yearly.
That's my thing. But it's not often I reread books. But he has a chapter on the prodigal son, and when we're talking about experience, this is the reason why I want to tie it in, because it ties to the experience. He makes the assessment on the 2 sons, like their experience, and the motivation behind what they are wanting to experience and what they do experience. And he says that when the younger son went off and went crazy, he was living less loved. Because in his mind, his father didn't love him the way that he in reality actually did love him, which he found out through his experience. And then when he was embraced, and then as he moved forward and actually accepted the gifts, he lived loved. And so it's not that the father loved him more or less, it's that he experienced the love more or less because of what he believed. And the older son, when he does all that, he was living less loved as well, even though in his mind he thought he was deserving of more love. I just wanted to tie that in too, that like when we're talking about how I summed up like why don't people endeavor to go down rabbit holes or to seek more, it's because of a lack of faith, but it could also be a faith in the wrong thing, in the sense of like just like that son, like what he believed, his faith was that he was not loved by his father or loved sufficiently by his father. And just as what you're talking about with the guardrails too, like that is also in that story as well. Him making his understanding sufficient in his own mind, that's what he believed. And so therefore he went down he set up the path that he thought was going to be best for him. Just as the older son did as well. And both of them find out that the destination of that was actually not at all where they wanted to be. And so I think all that to say, it takes you gotta dare to believe these ridiculous things and then let that, propel you into this adventure of like the unknown, and I believe you'll be pleasantly surprised. It always defies expectations. And if you expect good things, it always defies what you expect in the best way possible.
It sounds like you have a lot of faith.
Yeah, some days.
Yeah. This is interesting. I think it ties directly into what we were talking about. He mentions that it's not just energy expenditure that keeps people away. You also have to have motivation. And so the person who has the faith in something good coming of the pursuit of understanding means that they're motivated to spend large quantities of energy on a problem. And that means at some level that not understanding something or having a bug in your thinking bothers you a lot. So the type of people that are driven or have the will to know are the type of people that are bothered by not understanding something. And I think this is an important time to just kind of bring in the concept of like it's okay. It's totally fine. It's totally fine to not be the type of person that wants to look into something. I am thinking of my wonderful mother at this moment because I think she loves to listen to me talk about the stuff that I'm thinking about. My dad is similar in the way that he approaches things. And my dad and I could talk for 5 hours about something, not concluding anything, and think that that was the best time ever. And I think that my mom would much rather conclude something, and that's not a bad thing. I think you need both. Like even an example being my parents being married happily, and they are very different. And so the willingness to expend time in this and energy in this pursuit varies greatly between the two of them. But the need to or desire to come to a conclusion is sort of, I need that in my life because I would pursue the rabbit trails down, for miles and never bring back anything of use. But the sort of need to conclude is something that brings utility out of my desire to pursue the deeper understanding. And also, I just wanted to say, like, it's not better or worse to be one way or the other. This article is obviously talking about the benefits of being one way, but I think when it comes to natural proclivities, it's like, you got to leave some room for this is the way that I like things to be. So I can be wrong utilizing my tendencies just as much as I can be of benefit to whatever situation.
That's good. I don't have anything to add to that.
Thank you for your honesty.
Yeah.
Earlier in the article, he referred to the one aspect of wisdom being virtue and honesty, integrity, a sort of diligence in pursuit of understanding, and even a bravery like what we were talking about with the adventure. He says here, related to this honesty or integrity, a sort of compulsive unwillingness or inability to lie to yourself. Richard Feynman said, the first rule of science is that you do not fool yourself, and you are the easiest person to fool. It is uniquely easy to lie to yourself because there's no external force keeping you honest. Only you can run the constant loop of asking, do I really understand this? I think that's super interesting to me, just on the point of encouraging the people around me to be accountable to themselves, because I think the danger, it might be important to specify what I think the danger is of not doing this, because even as I just said, it's totally fine to be the way that you are, because I think that everyone brings to the table something of value in the way that we all push and pull on one another to hone our aim towards the good that is possible when we work together. I also think that there's a danger that maybe I can see because of my willingness to pursue this understanding or whatever. I can more easily spot the danger in not doing that, because it's like, yeah, of course, everybody should be doing what I'm doing. But the danger, I think, as I see it, is that you would fall short of what is potential through a greater experience of something that lends itself to understanding it, making it more graspable and therefore more easily utilized towards the benefit of you and other people in your life. And so when people too quickly settle for an answer, I think that I want to be aware of this fact that, listen, that's great. If you honestly believe that, then more power to you. I long for the security of a certain answer like nobody else. And that's why I end up pursuing these other alternative explanations, because I want to get to a place where I can feel that, but I don't feel that at the same place as you. And so I think it's a great thing to offer to people. Like, you are the only person that can keep asking yourself, do I really understand this? And I think that's an important question to always have at the ready when you're claiming knowledge of something.
Mm. I think just to add more angles on the matter, because I'm definitely an overthinker. I second guess myself constantly, and it sounds like this is like you can equate it to second guessing yourself, or being willing and able to second guess yourself, which isn't necessarily bad. But there's, going back to the faith thing, there's like a weird paradox of, especially when it comes to the weightier things of life, where you'll never have sufficient understanding to make the step that you ought. And so, just for the sake of encouragement of those type of things, I think it's important to recognize and also to expose some of my presuppositions about God and also His creation, our lives, is that He has designed life in such a way that if the understanding that you think you have on the weightiest of matters is insufficient, life is designed in such a way that the more you experience, the more it will be clear to you, like, I'm lacking understanding here. And so I think, just for the sake of that too, is like the burden of ironing out our understanding isn't solely on us. And oftentimes, sometimes that could be like this kind of goes with the push and pull of like doing things fast, but also being able to linger. But I think there's a lot of times where there is a deadline, there is a decision that has to be made. And sometimes choosing to not make the choice because you don't have sufficient understanding, that second guessing can be crippling. And so I'm just speaking from a place of my life, like, where there's times where I'm uncertain how to move forward. I don't know. I have choices before me. I don't know which one to go with. Obviously, you do your due diligence to try to acquire the understanding you lack. But at the end of the day, you got to make a choice. And so just stepping in faith in God, knowing that, well, no matter what, I trust that you're my teacher and you will expose my lack of understanding, like, by virtue of the way you even just design the world. Is like, if I'm like critically lacking crucial understanding and knowledge and wisdom, the fruit of my choices when I act upon the misunderstanding will show to me that, like, okay, I have insufficient understanding. And no matter how much I second guess myself, it wasn't until I made that step that I really get to the heart of the matter. So there's another side of the coin too, just to add like a, maybe even for those who do second guess yourself often, but to the point where you're crippled. There is an extreme on the. It's like a weird dance here, and there is a paradoxical element to our lives, where intelligence will only get us so far. Um, and so maybe that's another thing I'd include into the category of intelligence is knowing when to just take the leap.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that a huge aspect of all of this is discernment, which is an overly spiritualized word. I think that discernment, being able to differentiate between a good and a bad answer, is an extremely powerful ability. And even what we were talking about earlier with the passage from 1 Corinthians, that knowledge leads to arrogance in many cases, but love builds up, and anyone who's in pursuit of God is sort of set on the right track. At least that's what I'm remembering of that passage. How does the second part where he talks
if
about
anyone loves God, he is known by him? Is that the verse you're talking about?
Yeah, and knows him. What does it follow up with?
He just goes into the matter at hand about eating things sacrificed to idols.
Yeah, I think that, I don't know. I don't want to shoehorn the topic of conversation into the verse, but the way that it's hitting me right now with all of this as our context, which of course is not the biblical context. It's not that, Nabeel Quereshi.
No.
So the way that it's striking me now is that if you love God, if you're in pursuit of God, and I think that the word, I don't know what the word is there, but I'm guessing it's agape, so it has a connotation of self-sacrifice. So it's entirely sacrificing yourself to this understanding of God, but more than just matters of theology, it's the understanding of God in each and every topic. The more that you are loved by God, and I take that to mean the more that you open yourself up to what it is that is the highest possible good that can occur in you through your faith to step out into a greater understanding of an issue. Because that's the thing. Anything that you think is worth pursuing and a better understanding of is going to be a greater problem when you look into it. It's sort of like the Hydra image from Greek mythology, that if you cut off the one head, there are 7 more in its place. So the problems get more and more varied until you get to the root, right? And so the fear of pursuing these things is legitimate. It is going to get more complicated the more that you look into something. And so the tendency to want to, I said sweep it under the rug earlier. I think that's kind of the same thing. These things multiply in the darkness, and at least that's my assertion, that they get more and more twisted and tangled and harder to solve the longer that you don't address them. And so when you have the intuition that you want to understand something more or to a greater degree, I think it is important that you're honest with yourself about that, rather than just going with sort of the false assertion that you do know what's going on and you don't want to look into it anymore. Because if you think there's a possibility that you might not know what's going on, that would be worse to you than coming to that conclusion honestly, confronting the reality, and moving forward, to a place where you actually do have a better grasp through experience.
Yeah. And now it's my turn to use a Petersonian trope. It's that whole thing too about like the whole dragon and the treasure thing, right? Like the whole point of what we're talking about, even in the whole getting to the root of the Hydra, if you will, is that you then obtain something that will help you move forward. But if you never actually go through the effort of getting what's at the root, you lack the riches you otherwise would have obtained. And even with that deficit of riches, of understanding, you then pursue other endeavors with less understanding, which that's why I think it gets tangled. It's like, because you didn't actually wrestle with this problem, you then went on to try to solve other problems where you needed the thing that's at the root of this problem in order to tackle the rest. And so your life can get so convoluted when you don't actually love truth.
Yeah. 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 Actually loving truth is harder than it sounds.
Yeah, it's scary. You gotta fight dragons, bro.
It's true. I really like this passage. I'm just going to read it because I think it's important. Understanding something really deeply is connected to our physical intuition. A simple words-based understanding can only go so far. Visualizing something in 3 dimensions can help you with a concrete hook that your brain can grasp onto and use as a model. Understanding then has a physical context that it can take place in. This is why Jesus speaks in parables throughout the New Testament in ways that stick with you long after you've read them, rather than just stating the abstract principle. Are not 2 sparrows sold for a cent, and yet not one of them will fall to the ground apart from your Father? Can stick with you forever in a way that God watches over all living beings will not.
This passage is the reason why I thought it was the other Nabeel Quereshi.
Yes, it did get confusing at this point for me as well. I'm always fascinated to see people. I don't think that this Nabeel Quereshi, prescribes to any or subscribes to any religious tradition, and yet I think that his introduction of Jesus here is extremely astute. Jesus speaking in parables is one of the more interesting things about Jesus because, of course, Quereshi here is trying to make the point that it's a teaching device that allows Jesus' words to stick with people and therefore be more impactful over the long haul. And I think that's true. But I also think that a common Christian interpretation of parables is sort of whatever I can get my hands around the quickest or the easiest is the right interpretation of this passage. You run into ones like the passage about the unjust steward, and you're like, wait, so Jesus wants me to lie to people? You know, like I don't think that's right, but that is the easiest and most graspable conclusion if you're just taking at face value the way that goes, if you know the story. I really appreciated the idea that a parable is designed to get into your body, to make you feel something, and to give you a model that sort of elicits emotion. I feel like the sparrows help you connect with that abstract idea much better than, as he points out, just saying God cares for all living beings. That who cares? You know, that's too big. There's too many living beings. But sparrows, I see a sparrow and I could think, oh, that's like what Jesus said about how God cares about all of them, and that infers that he cares about me. It gives you a point of reintroducing sort of that. In this case, it's not really a problem, but the point that Jesus is after. I think that I really love the line. He says, "A simple words-based understanding can only go so far." And if I had to take a sentence out of context here, I think that applies to so much of the way that we approach understanding in our world. It definitely bleeds into the way that people understand scriptures, but I think just in general, people are more willing to understand a simple narrative in the form of a fact than they are to seek out a greater understanding of the full story and the picture that can communicate the truth to them. That wasn't exactly precise, but does that make sense to you?
No.
Okay. I think that people would rather deal in terms of words and phrases that conclude or help them to conclude with what they think that they're supposed to conclude at the beginning. So rather than learning something through a complex image, which I think a parable often is a complex idea condensed into image form that allows you to pass it on more easily. But then as you sit with the story or the problem or the interesting sort of poetic nature of the parable, you're able to zoom in a way that a lower resolution words-based understanding of a concept is not capable of allowing you to do that.
Yeah. And it also leaves room for the ability to actually explore to take place. Whereas words-based, when you're just trying to get to the fact of the matter, and it's like there's more to truth than just facts. I think that's another thing too. I think even when you're talking about like the whole parable going to the heart, allows more heart-based understanding to actually take shape. I think that's a crucial element. That is, when we talk about intelligence, mostly we associate that with facts and empiricism, but again, another attempt to broaden the category or maybe redeem that word. You're actually able to explore in truth and take great labors in the exploration, because it's revealed to you that, like, oh, it's not just the facts that is the reason why Jesus wasn't teaching just so I can understand more facts. It's like there's actually a heart thing here, and logic can't get me there. And so with making the distinction between a words-based assertion of truth and an actual concrete thing, it's like you actually create a world, and that's more in line with reality. I think that's how you're not lost in theories anymore. Like you're actually, or you can even come up with new theories because of the way that you are able to bring your own idiosyncrasies into the process of discovery, and can walk away with something much different than another person who, actually interacted with this world rather than a words-based assertion.
Yeah, I think that's actually a super foundational element of community as well, because until you present what it is that you have genuinely encountered and come to the conclusion of to another person, you can be afraid of the idea that you might be the only person that's ever thought this in the world, and that's very unrealistic. In that you're not that special, like
There's nothing new under the sun.
Sure, and the odds that you came up with something that no one else has ever come up with they're pretty slim, maybe, and that's awesome. But I think that very often when I voice something that is something I'm afraid I might be, misperceiving or something, another person has gone through the exact experience that I have, and my eventual willingness to overcome my potential shame at being different or other often leads to a more unifying moment just through the vulnerability of saying, hey, I think I've found this to be true. Is this, you don't even have to ask the question. It's like, I think I found this to be true. And, oh my gosh, I did too when I was your age, or when I first had my first kid. There's so many different times and scenarios where this has played out, and in an extremely beneficial way,
Yeah. And I'm thinking on if I should even bring in whatever, I'm going to do it. It's even like there's a word dialectic approach to understanding, which is like someone asserts a thesis and then you bring in the antithesis to kind of, see if this thesis holds up to critique. And then there's something called the Hegelian dialectic, which is this process of, challenging assertions, but then actually recognizing that maybe both assertions have validity to them, and then you synthesize them as well. So even with that, it's like you can synthesize the interaction as well, help another person see what maybe they didn't notice when they experienced that, and the person who is just freshly interacting with it can also see what they saw when they interacted with it, and they synthesize the two experiences. Like I think that's crucial to community. And why? Well, I think that's why community is crucial.
Yeah, I was going to say that that's how our sense perception works in the world as well. Our eyes and our ears, our nose and our mouth. I think taste and smell are very closely linked because they inform one another. So if you plug your nose, something tastes different than if you're taking in the full aroma, or if something smells bad while you're eating something, it kind of ruins the flavor of it. Even if the flavor is excellent, just the smell from something nearby can affect your perception of it. And I think it's super important that we work together in whatever communities that we're in, although this is definitely something the Bible talks about being extremely possible within the Christian community, which is described as a body, even with the different parts and functions and roles that people play in informing one another of where it is that you are in the world and what it is that is going on. I wanted to introduce something that I think that we'll talk about maybe in a different podcast at greater length. I love this sort of breakdown of knowing. I first heard it from John Vervaeke, and he just kind of threw it away because he's a cognitive scientist with a lot of information. He has definitely read too many books. But I'm just going to read the 4 different types of knowing, and then these short sentences about it. This is actually just from somebody that wrote about it that I found online, but I found the article again, so this is what I'm using. So the first kind of knowing is propositional knowing. This form of knowing results in beliefs and truths. So that's sort of related to the facts that we've been talking about. Then the second is procedural. This form of knowing results in skills. So this is a form of knowing something that empowers us. In terms of theory, sorry, I'm just reading this because I feel like it can help. It's about writing. It's about writing smooth connections of chords or knowing what to look for when you open a score. Sorry, this guy's talking about music from earlier in the article, but it's about sort of connecting the dots. So what it is that you propositionally understand and know, then it's about putting it into practice. Anyway, the third type of knowing is perspectival. This form of knowing is about how states of consciousness create situational awareness and a sense of presence. I think that language is a little bit opaque, but it's about perspective. And I think that's what we were just talking about, that each person in a conversation or a dialogue informs what it is that you're talking about in a way that only their perspective can shift the group perspective. And so that sort of like communal perspective is entirely dependent upon real and honest observations of what it is that's going on, rather than just a mere subjugation of your understanding to the sort of party line, right? Then there's participatory knowing. This is to know something in terms of your traits and character and how you've been shaped in order to fit the world. It's about faith, connection, feelings of at-one-ment, and a sense of realness. I think this is the experience that we've been talking about. And I think that all 4 are forms of knowing. And that's important to understand, that not one is elevated over the other. And so even as we talk about sort of contradicting what maybe are status quo understandings, we need to be willing to accept the reality that a fact can be a form of knowing, but it may not be the best form of knowing, depending on the subject, right? In science, a fact might be extremely useful and definitely more attainable, but in more metaphysical pursuits like philosophy or theology, there are ideas and doctrines and the like that demand a more procedural or perspectival or participatory knowing. And that doesn't mean that it's a higher level necessarily, I feel like participatory may be the highest level because it's sort of like this physical intuition. If you have a simple words-based understanding, that leaves you with only so much understanding. But to fully deep in your body understand something, that allows you to move about the world with that understanding. And so if it is true, I think that is extremely significant. Not what I'm saying about the participatory knowing. If what you know participatorily is true, then that allows you to navigate the world much more wisely, accurately, appropriately.
And yeah, and that's only those other three forms of knowledge is only possible if it is a concrete, like demonstrable truth. And I think that's what he's getting at. Like, I'm not sure if you're gonna read it, but he gets into like this scientist who really liked this other scientist's theory in the field that he was practicing, but he wanted to actually experientially know this assertion, and so he came up with a experiment. I think that's the thing too. Is like actually being able to experience it. You can't really get those other forms of knowledge if it's not a concrete thing.
Yeah, I agree. I'm going to skip the part about calculus. I will link to this in the description so that people can read it for themselves. I thought that it was relevant to the article, but I don't know how to talk about math.
There's no need to. I'd rather not.
Okay. Yeah, that not my strong suit.
No.
The algebra was where I started having problems, so calculus is way beyond my capacity. So he says, how many people actually go back and try to understand this or other such topics, referring to the calculus problem, in a deeper way? Very few. Moreover, the meta lesson is don't question it too deeply or you'll fall behind. Just learn the algorithm, plug in the numbers, and pass your exams. Speed is of the essence. In this way, school kills the will to understanding in people. My countervailing advice to people trying to understand something is go slow. Read slowly, think slowly, really spend time pondering the thing. Start by thinking about the question yourself before reading a bunch of stuff about it. A week or a month of continuous pondering about a question will get you surprisingly far. This passage was spoke to me because of definitely the part about school kills the will to understanding in people. I think that was kind of drilled into my head by John Taylor Gatto. We've talked a little bit about him.
Mm-hmm. I have his book on my shelf because of you.
Oh, very nice. Yeah. Yes. Famously, he wrote Dumbing Us Down. And it's his assertion that it's intentional, that this is a system that Rockefeller and other people of his era wanted to implement so that they could protect their intellectual property as well as the status quo, just to maintain stability with them sort of on the top of the pile, as well as it's an efficient method of producing the type of people that they needed to sort of feed their system. It's all very scary and Orwellian maybe, but the idea of going slow, reading slowly, thinking slowly, spending time with problems, that is something that we just don't have time for. And I wanted to introduce a social sort of pressure aspect to this conversation. I think that a lot of people feel pressured to not stand out. And so they're unwilling to question something, even if they don't understand it, and they long for the understanding that we've been talking about this evening. I think that there's a large amount of people that get caught up in the idea that if I question this, I might be the only one doing it, like I said earlier. And it's so important to me that I understand something that I have really been working to kind of work up the courage to be able to stand out because of the things that I am wondering about. You know what I mean? I was talking to you the other day about the way that zebras blend in with each other, so they do not want to stand out because their camouflage is designed to work only insofar as they blend in with the herd. So the average zebra is the most safe zebra, and because of that, uh, they 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 try to look exactly like every other zebra, and that's it's a good allegory, I think, for the way that people in a given group try to be as indistinguishable from one another intellectually as possible. And that doesn't lead to the perspective triangulation that we were just talking about.
I think too, with the going slow and what motivates the contrary is also true. Not It was exacerbated by the schooling system, but I think it's also, again, I try to look at things that plague us and try to see how it's not necessarily a novel issue, though maybe it's a more relevant issue because it's been made worse somewhere along the lines. But um, I'm trying to think of a way to introduce this without going into where these thoughts were derived from, what book I read. I don't think it's really necessary whose it was. Maybe it is necessary. It was a Carl Jung book. And he had a thought on it's only necessary because this is coming from a psychologist. So this is like his field. And this has been like a subject of, or it's been interjected in a lot of conversation I've been having recently just because it's really affected me and provoked a lot of thought. But he was describing the different stages of development that generally occur with every human. And he arrived at the stage of like normally around your 20s, when you start to have to, you start like wrestling with more of the existential crises than you were previously because you're younger and your consciousness and psyche wasn't as developed. But he said that most people, quote, solve these problems by developing their social selves. And that is finding an occupation and achieving some type of status to have something to show for your life, which solves the existential. It brings more value or worth to yourself. And anyways, he said something that this is the crux of it. That he said that the point of the problem is not to be solved, but to be wrestled with, and that the world does not reward you with wrestling with and developing your actual personal self. It rewards you for developing your social self. And so it behooves you to spend more time to develop quicker socially. And if you're doing that, you don't have time really to develop your personal self, or you don't have time to really sit with these type of problems, you know? So the whole going slowly, the other factors of these that goes into trying to go as quick as possible is, I think, motivated by trying to have something to show for with your life, that you actually have tangible evidence that I did this with my life. My existence is validated. And it's that scarcity mentality again. I think a lot of this ties to the scarcity mentality. But the real development comes with tackling bigger problems, which you ought to be less quick about advancing in them. And so just to kind of bring in a more I think this is very all encompassing. Like that's not even just unique to our culture. It's always been this issue that when you have in your mind the solution to my existential crises of like, what is life about? Like, why am I here? And you conclude that it's to be found in the development of my social life, and therefore I'm going to give it my all. um, and recognize I'm going to die sooner rather than later. Um, in the grand scheme of things, of course. Hopefully, you don't die young, But I think that's the thing too. Is like there's everything you're seeing tells you like why go slow. Like you only have a finite amount of time, uh, and so I would tie in that scripture, and I think it's in Corinthians. It's in one of the Corinthian letters, but he says, "But we do not walk by sight, but we walk by faith." Because everything that I see, everything that I hear, is telling me I gotta move quick, man. Like, otherwise I'm wasting, and we hate waste. Like these are valuable resources, and if I don't invest them, I'm just wasting it. And especially time. So all that to say, like to try to make the argument that the investment of more time and going slowly is actually more valuable, despite what your senses may tell you, and even what the status quo is, that there is an argument to be made that going slow is actually worthwhile, and I would argue more worthwhile for that reason.
Yeah. Actually, I'm going to release this tomorrow as we're recording. But I just wrote a piece about having, my wife and I just had our first son and our first kid. And the way that it's not really about how it forced me to slow down, but the thought connected with that terminology, because in many ways it has slowed down my ascension in life. I'm less free to pursue opportunities because of the amount of time that I have now committed to my son. Although, technically I haven't committed it to him. I just, in principle, have committed it to him, for his development, for his survival, really, at this point in his life. And so the core of the article is that my relationship with my wife, my relationship with my son, and any kids that we may have in the future, those are the things that will matter most to me when I die. And just using that heuristic, I think that's a good way to sort of pinpoint what it is that is eternal in some sense. And as you were speaking, it was reminding me of a thought I had a while ago, that Christians have an advantage when it comes to things like this, where because we believe that we have eternal life, and I don't know what that means really, it probably would behoove us to do an episode on that, because I want to better lay out sort of the lack of understanding that I have there. I don't know that it's possible to fully describe what that exactly means. And so I think it's important to wrestle with that. But one of the things I think it does mean is that we can take a long view of what it is that we are doing on a daily basis. That's essentially what sort of defines a Christian perspective on so many things. I don't mean in general. I mean someone who is informed by living their life in the kingdom according to the words of Jesus, that person is able to live with eternity informing their perspective. And because of that, they have a distinct advantage in that what they do now affects something that is eternal. And so they call it time dilation in science, right? When you're struck by the awe of something, you don't have a sense of time. Or when you're in a flow state, when you're immersed in something, your sense of time, you could spend 4 hours on something, it feels like 3 minutes, and vice versa. You could do something that was sort of arduous that feels like it only took 5 minutes, but you spent 5 hours on it. And because of the eternal perspective introduced by the scriptures, but also I think a reality of the experience of God in the moment, in the present moment, I believe that there is an advantage for the Christian person when it comes to living the fullness of each moment that we have on earth not just in the perspective of the afterlife, but like when it comes to sacrificing for my family, I'm able to do that in good faith that those sacrifices will lead to sort of the next step of eternity taking place, even if as it just relates to on earth. The better I can care for and love and look out for my son, I am providing the world with a better asset, a better resource in the form of my well taken care of son. And it's not all up to me, but to the extent that I can contribute to that positively, I do believe that that's something of a eternal benefit, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. I think that's why I keep referring to the scarcity mentality. And
yes, that's where the thought originated. A long time ago, we were having that conversation about scarcity and the scarcity mindset versus eternally playable games.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the eternal life aspect, I too don't have a very exhaustive understanding of that. But I was trying to find it. I don't know what verse it is. Somewhere in Hebrews talks about how we've been liberated from the fear of death, which it puts it where the fear of death is what enslaves people to sin. It's like the fear of death is what motivates them to live a life that is contrary to God's will.
Yeah, I just want to interject to say that's what I was referring to when I said that the Christian perspective or whatever that part was, that we if that's true, that we're as a group of people liberated from the fear of death, and the fear of death leads to sin or missing the mark, missing the opportunity to do the best possible thing in a given situation. I think that's where, and you're about to say it about scarcity mindset, but that is the crux of the matter, that we think it's more important to do something right now in a it's not small mind, with a small view of things, like a small sort of perspective. When you're liberated from that, you're able to take things in a much broader scope. I think that's the whole thing, right? That we would love God, which he's an infinite being, so that's pretty broad, you know. Yeah. And then you're able to sort of localize that to the people around you. It says that you're to love your neighbor. And those two things are linked as the whole point. That's what hitting the mark looks like.
Yeah, and the eternal perspective, it does exactly what you're talking about with the getting a broader thing, so that what's going on in the here and now is not, we overinflate it when we don't see it from an eternal perspective. Like things look so much bigger when you actually are able to, kind of like what Paul talks about, like the things we are currently suffering cannot compare to the eternal weight of glory. Meaning the things that are eternal, that are to come, is actually way, way weightier and bigger than the things that we are wrestling with right now. So it enables you to actually help you overcome the obstacles, because you recognize the obstacle is not as big as you think it is. And not only overcome, but actually be able to take your time with the obstacles too, because you recognize, like, I'm not going to taste death. I'm like, I have an infinite resource of eternity, and amongst other resources that are found in Christ, especially wisdom. And so with that, with the whole go slow, take your time with working out understanding in your pursuit of it, that is a perspective that I think is really an essential part of Christian doctrine, because the motivation to go fast is mostly the fear of death, which leaves you wide open to the what's the assertion that I forget what the term is. You know what people say, like, oh, Christianity is just like a death, fear of death alleviation or something like that.
Yeah. I'm just thinking of the opiate of the masses and Christianity as a death cult, but I do know what you mean. It's sort of like death anxiety,
Yeah.
whatever, a solution for death anxiety.
And it is.
Yeah,
I embrace
low-key.
that. High key is alleviation of death anxiety. Yes, they are correct in their assessment. That is what Christianity is.
I do think that I think we've talked about this in the past, but it's sort of something Nietzsche talks about in his criticism of Christianity that I don't think he gets quite accurately. I do think it's an accurate assessment of a lot of people's sort of practical example of their faith in God and this lack of they want to avoid the fear of death, but Jesus actually calls people to die, and so it's sort of an exposure therapy for death anxiety in a strange way.
Yeah.
I wanted to mention one of my favorite authors is Dallas Willard, and he informed another one of my favorite authors, John Mark Comer, to a great extent. And there's a book that Comer wrote called "The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry," based on a quote from Willard when he was asked by another pastor, "How can I grow spiritually?" And he said, Willard paused for 30 seconds to think about it, didn't say anything, and he said, "If you want to grow spiritually, then you must ruthlessly eliminate hurry in your life." And it's a profound line. Comer wrote an entire book about how our culture kind of has the opposite assumption, like what you were saying, that we are a hurried bunch of people. And it's not necessarily only our culture that has had that problem, but it is definitely evident that it is a thing that we struggle with. I think that the desire to grow spiritually, I don't even think I'm getting that part exactly right, but taking that as the framework, I think that applies to so many people. If you want to become the type of person who's not guided by your fear of death, which can be a strong motivating factor in a positive way in some cases, but fear is not a perfect motivator. And so if you don't want that to be what guides you, I think that taking the time to recognize your limitations, but also your capabilities, and to encounter things for yourself allows you to develop the necessary capacity to confront sort of the reality of your own death. Because if you're going around, it's sort of like the easy answer thing. Like, well, like what you were talking about with Jung, I'll just prove that I did an eternally significant thing by, making partner at the firm or whatever is your
idol
coping strategy. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And instead of doing that, I think there's a way of pausing, sitting, recognizing who it is that you are, what it is that you are struggling with in an immediate sense, like what is the next right thing that I can do? And then moving forward from there, thinking along the lines that this is like this confrontation, this struggle, this rabbit trail that I am about to go down is precisely what will lead to the peace that I'm longing for. And I think as a Christian, I would tie that to the notion that it's because that's where you meet God. I've been looking for a place to insert this sort of, but the way that I see the exponential growth of a person's character in times of trial is directly tied to this conversation, because when you have an easy answer, you find out that it's insufficient only when it's confronted by a difficult problem. And life is full of difficult problems. That's a fact. just like dying is a fact. It's a difficult problem to wrap your head around. And so why are you here? All these existential problems that we are capable of intuiting, but in many cases not brave enough to walk through go through the process of just confronting them. I think that,
And even be confronted by them.
yeah, to be evaluated by reality, to stand up against it and see how you match up. I think that fear keeps us from fully encountering what it is that you and I put our faith in. Because the reason that we are able to put our faith in God is because of our encounters with him. And this is sort of an attempt at evangelism, but I don't mean it to be directly. It's just sort of true that, well, I've found it to be true that in life, the things that I discover after going through difficult circumstances are much more likely to influence a hope or a strengthening of my faith than they are to do the opposite. Or vice versa, if I am putting my faith in the wrong thing, my faith sort of decreases in that thing as I begin to honestly encounter the struggles that it's producing in my life. I was talking with a coworker today about her son. I was actually talking about myself, and then she brought up her son because I struggled with substance abuse to some extent. I don't know, just party, drugs, and partying, and so all that goes with that. And I grew up in a Christian home. She's a Christian. Her son has struggled with drugs, kind of got off of them, and then is back on them now. And it was a very uplifting conversation for her because she was able to see that my experience was just coming to the end of the road, sort of hedonism and self-gratification. I was like, this is dumb. At some point, I just was able to see it for what it was and think, I don't want to do this anymore. Like, I kind of wish I didn't do this at all. And I think a lot of people don't understand that when you actually do something that's wrong, I think we can say substance abuse is at least dangerous, right? And when you're doing something that's not the fulfillment of your purpose or potential, you end up concluding like, well, if you're honest, and if I think this is a huge part of why we're interested by this conversation. If you're willing to pursue a deeper understanding of something, if you're willing to admit, maybe this isn't the right answer to my problems, then you're able to open yourself up to the information that's presenting itself to you, which if you're doing the wrong thing will be, hey, this is the wrong thing. Look at the cause and effect consequences that are causing you to suffer. And then from there, you're able to pursue, I would say, a relationship with God, that you're able to pursue a path of good things, a building up of good things in your life. It's kind of a all-encompassing phrase, but it applies to everything, I would say. Anything that's good is better than something that's bad. Okay.
Boo.
Clip it.
Yeah.
That's a YouTube short right there.
Yeah. That was very profound. I like that you brought up the counterpoint to being liberated from the anxiety of death or fear of death, and that Jesus calls you to die. Because I think that's an important thing to bring to context. It's not like it eliminates death, and not that you physically dying is actually all death is too. I think that's another important thing to bring into the conversation. And I think this thought ties into the question earlier about like why are people reluctant or even unwilling to dive down rabbit holes and really dig deep and pursue truth. It's because you will die in many ways. Um, and even especially like your conceptions of you will especially die. So I don't know if that can probably be applied that you will die, but if you're in the real belly of the beast, like yes, you will die, but even on your process to get there, what you thought was you is definitely going to die. Um, and so it just like strips you. The more you seek understanding, the more uncertain you become of what you thought you understood, and that's terrifying. Um, and if that's all that process gives to you, then yes, that is a terrible process to undergo. Um, and I think people who are honest with themselves understand that that's within the prospects of that endeavor is the losing of uncertainty, the losing of your sense of self, and even the losing of parts of yourself that have developed um, improperly. And that's putting it lightly. Um, and there's little evidence to show, other than testimony of other people who have undergone that, who can witness to the fact that no, on the other side of that is actually being a new creation. Um, yeah, that's terrifying. So maybe with the people who are hyper honest with themselves and self aware, that could be the biggest prohibitor as well. And I would say, yeah, that fear of death is causing you to be a slave of the thing that's not allowing you to live up to what you're made to be. And so that maybe I'm just adding on to that, tacking that on to that conversation earlier, because that was a fantastic question. Um, and with people who maybe are digging to that, maybe they even get to the self awareness of realizing, like, yeah, this is a costly endeavor, and I don't want to beat around the bush about the reality of what we're talking about. It's a dreadful one, um, but it takes faith to believe it's a worthwhile one.
Yeah, definitely. For the sake of time, I'm gonna kind of skip ahead and sort of sum up the last little section here. Definitely recommend clicking the link, which will be in the description for this article. He lays out two beautiful parables and has some great points that he makes after that. Yeah, definitely worth the read. And at the end, he ends with this quote. He says, "The photographer Robert Capa advised beginning photographers, if your pictures aren't good enough, you're not close enough." This is good fiction writing advice, by the way. It is also good advice for understanding things. When in doubt, go closer. I think that beautifully ties a bow on what I was just saying, that there are situations in life that you can run into where your easy answer is not going to be sufficient. And so you will often be confronted by this, like to repurpose the quote, if your easy answers aren't good enough, you're not close enough. You need to get closer to the heart of the issue. And very often it has to do with us. We live out of alignment with God, I think, more than, I just think that's true, that we live out of alignment with God, and that causes a lot of our problems. And so it's not just a matter of organizing your life to get back into alignment with God, but to recognize just the next step forward that can be good. And in so many ways, I think that is a path that you can start down by pursuing a deeper understanding, by getting closer to what is really going on. I know this was a section you wanted to talk about, so go for it. There's also a section where he has like three practical things. I thought we can end with that, sort of as it relates to this quote. So, any thoughts on the Robert Capa quote?
I have a lot of thoughts, but I'm trying to think which ones are worthwhile. the thing that struck me about it was, especially as a good launching off point for even starting the podcast. And I think we've gotten to a point in conversation that's not necessary to do any more than what I imagined we ought to have. Things I was going to assert are very tied with what we've already asserted, but well, I think as we're talking about it right now, what came to mind was when you're talking about properly organizing your life and being in alignment with God, and the inferred conclusion is you ought to get closer to God, and then the organization is a byproduct of that. But also just so it's not so one dimensional, meaning that just so we don't give the impression that God is so one dimensional, that getting closer to him means that like the morality will get sorted out and then you'll be like a good person. But it's like, I think this ties very well with even what we're talking about with the going slow and really actually loving the process of growing and understanding, not treating it as a means to an end. It's that there's so much room for, when you get closer to God, you get closer to the heart of so many other endeavors that actually your heart beats for. Like your passions thrive. And so then you're able to like, I don't know. I'm just saying this because like, a lot of my personal experience, especially in this last season, is really finding out, I'm trying to do this without going into too much detail right now. I mean, maybe there'll be time down the road, but just struggling with the understanding of, now that I'm further into my walk with Jesus, it's like undoing this presupposed idea of what it means for me to be my ideal self, is that it looks a lot different than who I was before I knew Jesus. But now I'm realizing in this season that like a lot of those things I was passionate about before Jesus, there's still room for those passions. And me getting closer to Jesus is actually, those passions are thriving more than ever. The more I pick them back up too. Like I'm the uses, one of those two words for them, is sanctified, meaning like these were made for a certain purpose and I'm now finding the purpose for which they were made for. That's what sanctified literally means. Trying to unravel the Christianese there. And so with that, just also adding in the more color to this whole thing of getting closer, is that there's room for you to get closer to the things that you are passionate about. And in fact, those endeavors thrive even more the closer you get to God. And so reason why I say it's a good launching off point for the podcast is just because like this is a platform for us to do just that, exactly what the introductory line was, of like exploring the deep things of life, and also what we consider worthwhile exploring. They aren't always going to be necessarily theological or all that, but they're not completely other than or irrelevant to our relationship with God and our closeness to Him. And so just the applications of this passage, of this essay, is very multidimensional. And really, I think it just is an encouragement to be bold in the honing in of, and to be passionate. Be bold and passionate about the honing in of your passions and what you actually want to explore and know more of, and love the process. But the caveat I'd put to that, so that's not just like a self-help advice, is that that's utterly impossible if you don't include God in that. If you don't actually love truth. I think that's all I got.
I think that is an exceptional place to end. I appreciate you, James, and I thank you for this wonderful conversation. Look forward to many more.
Yeah, man. This is actually a lot better than I expected. And I expect it to be good. I'm pleasantly surprised.
That's good. Thank you for that clarification.
Yeah. I want to disambiguate.
Yeah. Yes.
I expect this to be utterly dreadful, and so
low bar
Yeah.
to clear.
Well,
Yes.
I'm looking forward to this adventure, man. This is gonna be fun.
Yes. So long for now.